Good afternoon. I'm Gary at Gramshaw, and I'm in the Bristol offices of Foot Anstey today with Yanthe Richardson and Rebecca Kibby. We're going to ask the two young ladies with me some questions just around climate and the changes and guidance and bits and pieces that have come out over the course of the last 12 months. And it'd be great to get your input around Foot Anstey and your kind of guidance to your clients, etc. So climate change has been an increasingly part of our daily lives, and this winter has been absolutely no exception at all. It's also been prominent in conveyances following the guidance that was released in 2023. What was your immediate concerns when advising your clients when the guidance came out?
Thanks, Gary. I think our initial reaction to the guidance was that we would welcome it.
Mm-hmm.
Anything that I think helps the consumers and businesses to understand how the changing climate impacts their decisions to buy property or how it might impact their enjoyment of property in the future, I think is a good thing.
Yeah.
And as a network of property professionals, we may certainly play a role in being immersed in all of that and having to help clients in the best way that we possibly can. But obviously, one of the other things that was a concern for us or a consideration was just around liability for us as professional advisors.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, we can gather information, we can signpost clients to the right portfolio of searches to get the information and the data they need, but ultimately it is for them and their lenders to make decisions over whether, you know, the impact of some of that data and that possible climate change will mean that they may not purchase or may affect their buying decision.
Okay. So what did you do when the guidance came out initially? What was your initial steps protocol from a Foot Anstey perspective?
Well, there was a bit of balancing actually done, I think, wasn't there, around what the responsibilities were of us as opposed to what clients do or do not understand. Like Rebecca said, where we can actually signpost them and where our liability ends effectively, which is a difficult decision for all firms.
There was concerns amongst some conveyancers and also commercial real estate lawyers as well. That was outside the scope of their retainer. What was your view on that?
Well, I think those concerns are legitimate because, of course, you know, there is a lot of predictive data that we're looking at and the potential for things that might be forecasted or happening in the future. And to a degree, none of us know what the real impact of all of that is. So we were just keen to understand how we can be supportive and how we can look at how we provide the information, signpost clients and talk to them using our property experience about how that might impact them, but without it sort of being we are making a buying decision or we're telling them whether to buy that asset or not, or whether that's a good longer term investment. Because I think even those in the valuation and surveyor or climate change experts field would say, you know, none of us know the real answers to all of that.
Yeah.
And it's like anything that comes by any residential property matter, whether that's lay client or lender client, it's for them to sort of assess our advice, look at the information we've given them, and they have to make that final decision. That's not what we can be for them. But I do think we've got a duty to, as Rebecca says, to advise them as carefully as we can and make sure they've got all the information available to them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing that we are pointing out things that we wouldn't have necessarily pointed out before. It's a good thing that we are providing data and information in the searches that talk about the rising temperatures and how that might impact the property they're buying or the area and the surrounds. It's a good thing that we're looking at the data which talks about flood and flood resilience and all of that. So I don't think it's enough for us to just say there's a search, there you go, that's it. We have to go somewhat further than that to make sure that we are using our experience, because we are immersed in all of this day in, day out, to be able to say, well, here's the information and that's what might happen, or these are other examples of things that we've seen. So it goes slightly further than just providing the searches, but
also we're careful that we are not experts in the matter, so we can't interpret this for them, and we will signpost them to an expert, or we might say, you know, your consultants are always happy to speak to them, aren't they, when it comes to actually interpreting the data.
Yeah, so I'm hearing very much the duty of care and to forewarn and forearm your clients before purchasing that property.
Absolutely.
Yeah, good. So what made you make the decision as a firm to use the Gramshaw Climate Index analysis in your reporting?
So we actually looked at a couple of products, and obviously there are some emerging products coming onto the market, and no doubt they will evolve further. But what we found was that the information was set out really clearly. Clients like clarity, simple. There's a really good visual in the search that means that clients see that sort of from a visual perspective. So that was always really easy for us to sort of take that and interpret that and pass that on to the client. So that was kind of one of the factors. I think for us, what we've also chosen to do is to make sure that we include that as our standard suite of search package for our clients buying properties. And I think why that's important is because, again, you know, if you give clients the options to select which searches they might want to see, there are lots of options out there, and clients need, you know, information that really does materially impact their buying decision. So we took the decision to be responsible and to say we're going to add that into our standardised search package so that they have that information. Obviously, if they want more in-depth information, you can go on to request further different types of searches to accompany that. But yeah, that was our decision.
For physical risks, they can be considered as existing environmental search due diligence risks, just projected forward into the future. But what steps did you take to advise your clients of the information in the climate index ratings as part of your overall environmental due diligence?
Most importantly, we flagged it to them as early as we could. So this is one of the searches that we'll do at the very beginning. It comes back really quickly. And if we see something in there that might affect a buying decision, the really important thing is to make a client aware as early as we can. They can go off and do their own research. They can talk to an expert if they want to. And they're not going to get too far down the line and find that actually this isn't the right property for them because of these risks. There's a big difference between something like, you know, everyone's aware of things like sinkholes or ground stability, for example. They're looking at what's existing there or what might happen soon, but they're not necessarily looking at, you know, 20, 30 years away, which might be the life cycle of a property for a family. So I think that most important thing we're doing it as early as we can.
How do you translate the report and ratings guidance into your clients' advice? We released some clauses in 2023. Is that something that you use as a business to advise your clients?
Those clauses have definitely been helpful. Okay. Obviously, we've added our own sort of context to those in the context of the whole report and our own risk appetite for what we may or may want to commit to in those reports. Because, as you know, there's a degree of limiting some of the information in our retainer with clients as a result of the Law Society guidance that's been issued, and many firms have done that. But yes, we've used some of those clauses. I mean, what's made it really helpful is that the product is really self-explanatory, right? So there isn't a huge amount of work for us to do to interpret that and then provide lots of accompanying advice, which is where the product's really helpful. So we have used some of those clauses and we've embedded that as a standard sort of section within our report on title with our client, and then we send them the results to look through, which is really easy in terms of how that's laid out and set out for them to see.
Okay, excellent. So yeah, you're providing upfront guidance and attaching the reports.
Absolutely. So that's part of our final report piece. But if we do see a big red flag at the very beginning when we get that search back, we're not going to wait for the point where we're ready to report. We're going to tell that client as early as we can that that's a problem or potential problem.
So that leads me on well to the next question. So how do you report these risks to the lender?
Lenders are obviously they are a more sophisticated client, but they are still generally 90% of the time with residential matters our clients. So we have to look at what their specific instructions are to us. We have to look at, you know, UK Finance Handbook, Building Society Association Handbook, and see what they are asking of us. But ultimately, although there's lots of guidance in there, sometimes we just have to go to them and say, this has been flagged. Again, like with a lay client, we cannot make a decision for them as to whether or not that's really going to affect their security because we are not valuers. So we're going to be reporting that into them, giving them as much information as we can, and saying this is something you're going to need to think about.
I think lenders, like the whole industry, are still grappling with understanding the guidance and the impact and the effect that this may have on underwriting and lending decisions. So when we speak to valuers or when we speak to underwriting teams, you know, they're very much saying the same thing. So until there is something very definitive about what they want to know or don't want to know, or what their sort of red lines are on some of this stuff, you know, where there is, we will apply caution where we think it's necessary and report it and ask them to make a choice and decision.
And does that vary very much from lender to lender?
It really depends on the nature of the property, but it can. Some of them have very different appetites.
What you often find, and it's no different to any other aspects of their, I suppose, risk appetite through the UK Finance Handbook or the BSA, you'll have some of the bigger mainstream lenders like Nationwide or others that might make a decision and then others will follow suit. So sometimes I think there's a degree of waiting for that to happen, but it can vary because obviously each lender client has their own risk appetite.
And ultimately, they've got to be able to sell the property on in the worst case scenario. So that might be the term of the mortgage is, commonly 30 years now. A lot can happen in 30 years when it comes to climate change, and that is something that, while most of us will remortgage in that time or change lender, some won't, and actually they've got to think about, assume that they're going to go for the full term of that mortgage, and what would their position be in 30 years' time if they have to sell it at the last minute.
Yeah. And that's when, when we looked at the climate index analysis, we looked at that 5 and 30-year period, so that we followed the consensus with regards to the Bank of England and also the PRA as well.
Yeah, which is helpful.
Yeah. So in light of the guidance, do you think the UK Finance should respond to the guidance that's been issued around climate risk?
In terms of the handbook?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that there's a project underway at the moment to look at whether or not that needs to be updated.
Yeah.
But one of the challenges with the handbook for lenders is it's very rigid. So there are a certain set of questions they have to answer, and they have to find ways of shoehorning new information in to answer those questions, and that can be quite challenging. So as their lawyers, we are then stuck trying to find the answer to our question, which might not be in the most obvious place. So I think it's right to say that there needs to be some opening up of that, or potentially a collaborative piece with lenders to look at what other questions need to be included, which really should include environmental and climate change issues. There are some environmental stuff in there. There is some environmental stuff in there already.
Yeah, it's just whether it goes far enough and it's sufficiently clear enough for the legal profession to understand kind of where the line is drawn between what's reportable and what's not. The net result is that we talk about delays in transactions all of the time. Yeah. If there is unnecessary reporting to the lender, we've then got unnecessary responses to wait for. Yeah. The person impacted by all of that is then the person dead keen to move into their house and wanting to move. So where we can try and avoid any delays, it's things like clarity on the handbook that would really help for that as well.
Yeah, it helps us to avoid having to raise those post-offer queries, which can really slow down the transaction. But ultimately, from a lawyer's perspective, our certificate of title underwrites the risk in terms of the lending. We are the ones saying, yeah, this is fine, you can lend on this. So we do need to be sure that the guidance we're given on what they want to know and what they don't want to know is clear.
Yeah, very good. Thinking about transitional risk, such as energy performance and flood resilience, what are the practical issues for your clients in needing to understand that information?
First of all, we need to understand that the search is based on predictive modelling. So it's not a guaranteed outcome. That's quite challenging. I think it's also quite challenging depending on the nature of your client, whether we're talking about a residential property purchaser that only moves house on average once every 15 years, or a buy-to-let landlord, or a commercial client who might be buying up swathes of property. There's a difference there in risk appetite, but also in what are they looking for in a property. So a standard buyer is more concerned with whether or not they like the property, the road it's on, what schools are nearby. A commercial landlord's looking at return on investment and what money it might have to spend on a property to make sure it's sustainable as a long-term investment. So it's about who are you acting for, and what is their current understanding of the nature of the information you're giving to them. That helps you with knowing how far you're then needing to advise them.
And I think the transitional risk, where we're talking about the potential for there to be an enhanced EPC rating that's required, does present commercial challenges, because if you look at that in the context of the cost associated with bringing those properties up to a standard to meet the increased rating, particularly for commercial clients or buy-to-let clients, for example, that's got to be balanced against the kind of cost-benefit analysis of, do I invest and do all of these flood resilience measures or other energy measures that bring that property into standard versus what the rental yield is and what the commercial return is and that sort of thing. I think that's an interesting one for lenders as well, in terms of retrofitting and where they are already have secured lending against an asset that needs to be retrofitted for some of those standards. What happens there? Who funds it? What happens with the cost? Do they give the customer a payment holiday whilst they're doing that? There's all sorts of options on the table, but the transitional risks are definitely very topical at the moment, particularly because of the costs involved in meeting those expectations. So right thing to do from a climate and responsibility perspective, but lots of costs associated for some of those kind of older properties not meeting those standards.
We do see that also with our RP clients, our registered providers, housing association clients, where they might be looking at void disposal projects because they've got swathes of properties that they've had for a number of years that they either don't see that it's not a good investment for them to upgrade and retrofit when they could sell that property on and then use that money to build more new social housing.
What consideration for climate risks are unique for commercial clients, like green leases, etc.?
So I think for our commercial clients, particularly in landlord and tenant scenarios, is an interesting debate, because I think on all sides, people want to do the right thing and they want to build in, say, the use of things like green leases and clauses that are used to building, responsibilities around some of these areas. But the two, so landlord and tenants may have very different perspectives about sort of what their intentions are on these areas, right? So a commercial landlord is going to be saying, right, well, I think the cost for these measures need to sit with the tenant, because ultimately, longer term, it involves a more energy efficient building, and therefore your utilities are going to be lower, that sort of thing. So they might be wanting to pass the cost on. Whereas a tenant might be saying, well, actually, I don't want to inherit the cost of that, because longer term, over the longer term investment, this is an asset owned by the landlord, and so therefore our commercial clients should be footing the bill for some of that, because longer term and because the responsibility lies with them. So what we do see is an impetus and a desire for people to actually want to build in relevant clauses that help with some of these initiatives and start to sort of deal with in a commercial context who would be responsible for some of the measures and some of the costs. But it can often be a healthy debate as to where it lands in terms of the leases themselves and kind of what is said in the lease and who takes responsibility for cost.
What has been your client's response to climate information advice?
I think there's been a big difference since more of these issues have hit the headlines. So, we see a change when there's a headline around, big sinkholes opened up in Greenwich, for example, or there's been a big flood event. I think there's, like we said earlier, there's a big difference between events that have happened or look like they might immediately happen, as opposed to what's coming down the line. There's a lot of intrigue in it, and clients are asking us more questions. But really helpfully, what we can do is obviously sign them back to your consultants, who I'm very happy to have a chat with them and help them to understand the data that you've provided, and that's really priceless, actually.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. So, for example, clients are looking at some of the rising temperature data, and they may be purchasing a harbour-side flat with, glass-facing windows, double-sided, and that's sort of how comfortable are they going to be in that sort of environment, and what is the data saying about the rising temperatures, and how does that look and feel if they're buying that property, and what does that feel like in sort of 5 or 10 years' time? And I think that's the interesting point where our role sort of draws a line, as far as we say, this is the predictive data, this is what the information is telling you, that logic would dictate that might be an issue with that particular asset, but this is ultimately a buying decision for you. So sometimes you talk that through, they may speak with your consultants, and ultimately what we haven't seen is anyone look at that data and particularly withdraw from a transaction and say, well, that's really put me off, because there's still quite a lot of uncertainty in it. But what we have seen is people saying it's really helpful.
Good. And it's about putting it in a commercial context as well, isn't it? So we're happy to, the consultancy team and the guys at Granshire are happy to talk to all chain of that transaction as well. So it's about facilitating the transaction as opposed to giving you information and trying to block that transaction going through. So
I think that's sometimes how these kind of reports can be interpreted, particularly by sellers. So you raise some extra questions because of the higher flood risk, and you kind of get quite a defensive response. It's not always what you're trying to get out of it. What you're trying to get out of it is enough information for your client to make a positive decision if you can help them to.
Yeah, ultimately, by which time they've picked the carpet and curtains and everything, right? So, which is kind of where you start with these things. So, it is all about just achieving.
Of course, again, it depends on the type of client you're talking about. Someone's buying their home, they want to live in, raise their family in. That's a different decision to one they're buying to let out, for example.
I think what would be interesting would be seeing how commercial clients use potentially that to their advantage. So, for example, if you're a buy-to-let investor and you're looking to purchase assets to rent them, and so it's not an emotional purchase and it's an investment, would you use some of those results as leverage, for example, to say, well, there's going to be some future cost involved in that, in mitigating against some of those concerns, therefore I want a price reduction. We've not seen that, but you can imagine it happening in terms of, obviously different parties have different lens through which they look at these things.
There is more sector-specific guidance coming out this year. What are your hopes and expectations for this, and how will it support your advice to your clients?
I think we really hope that it will give us further clarity on what our duty really is.
Mhm.
The guidance we've had so far has been helpful, and I think it can go much further. Whether that's saying we must always carry out a search and give them access to a climate change specialist, or whether that's putting the responsibility back on the client to go and do their own research as a result of what they might find from that search result. But we do need it to clarify further where the duty lies. I also think that it's important to be really clear that we are not the experts in climate change. But like any search result, we can give them, like we said earlier, we can give them guidance, we can steer them towards the data, but we're not qualified, we're lawyers, we're not qualified to interpret that information. That's why we get the search results in the first place, so we can highlight the information and someone else to do further research if they want to.
Yeah, and I think similarly, we were talking earlier about the UK Finance Handbook. It would be really helpful if lenders could really collaborate and make some decisions on that, so that it does avoid the delay in unnecessary reporting. And so we're clear on what exact reports they might need, or what exact circumstances require reporting and what do not, because that will help in the context of at the moment with the uncertainty you report for report's sake potentially.
Do you feel in the midst of them updating the UK Finance Handbook that there's a situation that's going to be more emphasis put back on you as a law firm with regards to some of these questions and queries coming back?
This could be quite a contentious answer. I think when we're representing lenders and clients in a property transaction and finance transaction to fund that asset, we have a dual responsibility to private client and bank.
Yeah.
And in doing so, and in signing our certificate of title, we are signing that we have conducted our due diligence and the asset is good and marketable, and there is no impediment to their security going forward. So that liability already sits there, insofar as that is part of the role. We have to sign that certificate, and that's the role we do for a lender at the moment. But I do think that there is a feeling amongst conveyancers and lawyers that often that's the fallback position. So where there is mist, where there is greyness, and where there is no clarity, the fallback position is that there is a catch-all because we've signed the certificate of title. So I think we would definitely go as far as to say that our profession would like further clarity on that, because in all of what we do, we want to be clear on what the expectation of our clients are, both lender and private client.
I think that pretty much wraps up today's Q&A. So thank you very, very much to Rebecca, Kibby, and also Yanthe Richardson. I hope everyone watching has enjoyed the session. And yeah, I'm sure we'll have more sessions coming soon. So thanks for listening.
Thank you.